Provo, Utah is a small, quiet city located about 50 miles south from Salt Lake City in Utah County. Provo is perhaps best known for being the location of Brigham Young University, a private university run by the Mormon Church. BYU's influence on Provo is near omnipresent, as a huge Y was constructed in the university's honor on the nearby mountainside that serves as a reminder to passers-by from miles away. However, much less apparent to the naked eye from afar, and much lesser known about in general to the greater outside world, the surrounding mountains and foothills near Provo are home to a great number of caves, the most famous of which being Timpanogos Caves, a series of stunning caves on Mount Timpanogos that serves as a seasonal tourist attraction during the warmer months. However, while the Timpanogos Caves are the most well-known caves, the region surrounding Provo, Utah is known as a hotspot for cavers, as there are a number of caves, both natural and man-made, riddling the surrounding terrain, ripe for intrepid spelunkers to explore. And perhaps the most well-known of these smaller, lesser-known caves in the region is the infamous Nutty Putty Cave, a windy, constricting cave system where on November 25, 2009, a local man named John Edward Jones became horrifically stuck in a narrow portion of the cave, and despite rescuers' attempts to free him from the tight space where he had become trapped, John would ultimately die before they were able to do so, and Nutty Putty Cave was subsequently sealed off by authorities. The story of John's terrifying ordeal in Nutty Putty Cave has been told time and time again across numerous YouTube videos throughout the years, and so that's as far as I'll delve into that topic for now. However, unbeknownst to many who are familiar with John's tragic tale, but a fact widely known to locals, is that John was far from the first or last young adult that would lose their lives in the many caves peppered across Utah County, as 4 years preceding John's death in Nutty Putty Cave, an even deadlier incident would occur in a small man-made cave located just a stone's throw from the iconic Y on the mountainside, a cave that had been ominously dubbed by local spelunkers as the Cave of Death. At approximately 3 a.m. on August 18, 2005, a group of 5 friends consisting of a 28-year-old man named Scott McDonald, an 18-year-old woman named Ariel Singer, a 24-year-old man named J. Blake Donner, a 26-year-old man named Joseph Ferguson, and a 21-year-old woman named Jennifer Galbraith set off on a late-night hiking excursion to the Cave of Death, and after hiking through the warm, dark summer night for a while, just before 4:30 a.m. that morning, the group arrived at the unassuming entrance of the Cave of Death. The cave itself, which was thought to have once served as a small mine, descends into the mountainside via an approximately 4-foot-high shaft until reaching a depth of approximately 90 feet below ground, where the initial shaft forks, with one of the fork's prongs continuing off the main shaft for a short distance before the passage is blocked off by debris, creating a dead end. The other prong of the fork was accessible by a small access hole, which beneath was submerged in water. The approximately 2.5 foot in diameter water-filled passage continued on for approximately 15 feet before curving upwards into a small, air-filled cavern with waist-deep water that could be reached by braving this passage, and visiting this small air pocket chamber was the main draw to the cavern's visitors, and a previous visitor to the cave had fitted the water-filled passage with a rope to facilitate passage through the frigid waters of the sump into the small cavern. At approximately 4:30 a.m. that morning, 4 of the group's members entered the cave, as Joseph Ferguson had thought better of the idea after seeing the entrance to the cave, and instead opted to wait for the other four at the cave's mouth. After entering the cave, the other four members of the group descended into the cavern, and one by one, single file, they plunged into the icy waters of the sump and made their way to the small cavern at the tip of the prong. After hanging out in the small chamber for a while, the four decided to turn back and return to Joseph, who was waiting for them at the cave's entrance. However, after waiting for approximately 45 minutes for his friends to return, Joseph began to become increasingly worried about them, and he started making some phone calls to some of his local friends who had visited the cave to confer with them whether his concerns were unfounded or not. However, as the passing minutes turned to hours, at 6:30 a.m. that morning, about 2 hours after his friends had begun their descent into the cave, Joseph neither saw nor heard any traces of his friends coming from within the small, tight cave below, and he knew that something must have gone wrong during their excursion into the cave, and so Joseph promptly called for help. Search and rescue teams arrived at the Cave of Death a few hours later, and local officials were actually completely unaware of the cave's existence at all, and thus, authorities were forced to rely on Joseph to describe the conditions of the cave to them. Joseph briefed authorities on what he knew about the small cave and the narrow, water-filled sump that was the main draw of the cave, and so authorities came prepared, armed with a sump pump to help remove the water to facilitate safe navigation through the tight passage for both rescue officials and possibly for members of the group that could have been stranded or trapped within the air-filled chamber at the far end of the sump. Authorities then entered the cave with the pump's hose and descended through the 90-foot-long tunnel that led to the fork and the beginning of the underwater passage, where they found a few burnt-out candles and a flashlight resting nearby the water-filled sump's entrance hole. The team in the cave put their gear into place and then signaled to the team at the surface to begin the pumping process. As the pump began to remove water from the passage and the water levels began to drop, the officials inside the cave were horrified as they began to see the figure of a lifeless woman dressed in a t-shirt, shorts, and tennis shoes emerge from the depths of the pitch-black water just below them. It was the body of 21-year-old Jennifer Galbraith. Upon further inspection of her body's location, it soon became apparent to authorities that Jennifer had overshot the exit of the underwater passage and had instead mistakenly ventured into a tight, 4-foot dead end just past the exit hole, and had likely become disoriented and trapped within it. After officials removed Jennifer's body from the cave at approximately 9:45 a.m. that morning, authorities subsequently discovered the lifeless, single-file bodies of the other 3 members of the group within the water-filled sump as well, as 2 had sunk to the bottom of the sump, while the other was floating, lodged against the top of the sump, and by that afternoon, the remainder of the bodies were successfully removed from the cave by authorities. After removing the bodies from the sump, a clearer picture of what had befallen the group became apparent to investigating authorities. As was corroborated by Joseph's account of the morning's events, Jennifer had been leading the group as she had visited the cave before and was eager to show her friends inside. Notably, however, during her first outing to the cave, Jennifer had actually passed out underwater while she was traversing from the entrance to the air-filled cavern during her first visit to the cave, but she was nonetheless excited to return. During this fateful trip, after the group had hung out in the chamber for a little while, Jennifer again took the lead on the way back to the cave's entrance. However, she missed the small, tight entrance hole and mistakenly entered the dead-end passage, which was apparently not all too uncommon in the pitch-black, silt-laden waters, and after becoming disoriented and stuck within this dead-end passage, she subsequently drowned. Unfortunately, not dissimilar to the unfortunate fates of the two divers in Plura Cave that I featured in one of the first videos on the channel. As a result of becoming stuck, her body jammed the passageway and blocked off the tight exit hole in the narrow passage for her friends behind her, who were subsequently trapped in the water-filled sump and were apparently unable to retreat back to the air-filled chamber in time before they too succumbed to drowning as well. In the aftermath of the incident, the Cave of Death was sealed off by officials by using a combination of large rocks and cement, ensuring that the dubious and dangerous Cave of Death would claim no further victims in the future. The families of the victims and the local community as a whole were shocked by the sudden and tragic incident. Jennifer was described by those who knew her best as an adventurous young woman who was, quote, full of dreams. Blake, who had been dating Jennifer at the time, was described as a talented musician and an overall good guy. Ariel was described as, quote, a very bright and capable girl, and Scott was described as both a friendly guy and an adventurous spirit. Jennifer's father, when asked about the loss of his daughter, would reply with a sentiment that viewers of my channel are unfortunately all too familiar with at this point, stating, quote, I take comfort in knowing she was doing something she loved and she was with her friends. It just went bad, he said. Thank you all for watching.